All right, joining us today here on Green with Envy, we are very excited to have a special guest. If you are locked in and tuned in to NBA Twitter and Celtics Twitter especially, you are going to be very familiar with our next guest. Joining us from a whole bunch of different platforms, whether it's Celtics blog, Spot Track. You can find him on his own podcast with Trevor Lane, on his own YouTube show, with Trevor Lane. Joining us is the one and only Keith Smith. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, too many places, I feel like sometimes, but it's all good. We do what we have to do to make it work, right?
Absolutely. And before we get into the basketball talk, Keith, because we got a lot of things that people want to hear about regarding the Celtics, I've been following you for years now on Twitter. Maybe 5 years even. And I remember I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, you were posting that you might have to give up basketball writing to maybe provide for your family and get a typical job. So I was wondering, man, thinking back on those early days of just trying to make it as a writer and as you transition careers, and specifically the moments where you almost gave up, how does it feel to kind of be where you're at now? I knew you were doing well and gaining a following, but I looked at your profile yesterday and I texted Will. I was like, oh shit, Keith got almost you're inching towards 100,000 followers. When did this happen, man?
That's 100,000 people that don't have anything better to do, apparently. Yeah, so I had been doing basketball part-time for years, even before I was doing writing and kind of public-facing stuff. I was doing a lot of behind-the-scenes things for a couple different places, and it got to be more and more to the point where I had 2 full-time jobs. I was doing basketball full-time, and I was also working for Disney full-time. That's why all my Disney name tags are behind me on the wall here. But it was... Basketball was the dream. It was my happy place. I was happiest when I was doing basketball stuff. I would use almost all my vacation time to go do NBA things. And then it finally got to a point where it was actually my wife who said, hey, I think we could maybe make this work for you to do basketball full time. And it was 3 amazing weeks, and then the season shut down for the pandemic. And it was one of those things where things just got tough after that. It got really hard. I unfortunately was furloughed by a couple of the outlets I was working for at the time. And full credit to them, they kept me on months longer than they probably should have, to be quite honest. And then it just got to a point where everybody was scaling back and cutting back, and the bubble happened, and that helped to some extent, but the work didn't come back as quick as I would have hoped. And it got to that point where, like so many other people, because of the pandemic, it was, all right, I might have to get a real job again and figure it out. And I actually had something lined up, and then just as it goes, I firmly believe if you just keep working hard and try to be a good person, something good will come your way. And something popped, and then another thing popped, and then thankfully I was able to not have to do that and stay with just doing basketball work. So it's been a major blessing. Thrilled. I love what I do. It's I've never been, after a 20-year career with Disney, I've never been happier to leave a place that I never really thought I would leave or really wanted to leave, and it was going to have to be the dream, and I live the dream every day now. It's fantastic. I love what I do.
Ironically, the bubble came to Disney, so if they just held on a little bit, you could have been the inside source. You already had the passes, you had the clearance, you're in the area. That would have been a dream setup, right?
Right? Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. It was funny when I wrote that article for Yahoo Sports at the time, kind of pitching, hey, they should do Disney for the bubble, instead of these Las Vegas and cruise ships and building an arena on a private island, all that crazy fantasy island nonsense stuff that was out there. I never, my editor at the time over there was, he's a big Disney guy too. And both of us were like, yeah, we'll run it. It's content, but nothing will come of this. And it was like, holy crap, this is happening. And literally miles from my house. And I went once to it just to kind of check it out. And I only went once to one round of games before even the playoffs started. And then it was just, that was all the outlet could afford to send me, because it was a pricey endeavor to send writers there and all that. But yeah, man, it was it's been a wild run, but I no complaints. No one wants to hear them anyway. People have it way tougher than I do, and beyond that, it's these are first world problems, and
For sure.
we make it work.
Well, we appreciate hearing it because we're in the middle of doing the same thing here. We both have full-time jobs, and then we're building this into every free part of our days that we have outside of it. So we love hearing that type of story. But right now it's trade deadline week. We've been talking about it for what feels like forever, and I feel like we've gone from one position of Celtic specific sellers, buyers. We're developing young talent. We're moving on. Who the hell knows at this point? The Eastern Conference is insane. But so before we get to like Celtics topics and then go league wide a little bit, there's a question I'm just curious to know is and Greg texted me this the other day, like, trade value in the NBA makes no sense anymore. It's so hard to figure out what trade value is. And I was listening to the Ryan Russillo podcast the other day, and he was talking about how, using Evan Fournier last year as an example, he goes for 2 second-round picks, but then in the offseason, he still can get a 4-year, 17, 18, $19 million contract. That doesn't seem to quite equate. And then the first domino fell yesterday in this trade season, which was the Norm Powell and Rob Covington trade from the Blazers and Clippers. And they get back essentially, cap filler, Keon Johnson, intriguing piece in a second round pick. And so, as a Celtics fan who we've talked about Norm Powell between me, Greg, our podcasting cousin, Adam Taylor, we've had many a debate about Norm Powell, and that's the final price. It kind of leaves you scratching your head. So I'm curious, Keith, how do you evaluate value when it comes to trying to measure out different trade scenarios across the league?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not in a vacuum, I think, is the best way to think of it, because it really is one of those things where you look at that return the Blazers got, it looks real light, right? It doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. Just even Norman Powell alone, you feel like should have returned more. Maybe even Robert Covington alone, you feel like you maybe could have got a late first or at least 2 seconds for him and not had to take on some money and those kind of things. But I think there's 2 things I've learned with trades. One is every team approaches a trade from a different place. Sometimes it's about getting a player. Sometimes it's about getting rid of a player. Sometimes it's about creating opportunities for other players. More often than not, about 80 to 90% of trades for one team or the other, sometimes even both, sometimes 2 out of 3, if it's a 3-team trade, are motivated by the cap. It's, cap related. It's not necessarily about the players involved. It's more about their contracts. And then the other thing is, it's hard to judge trades today, like that Portland one, without knowing what the full picture is. Because now let's see, what do they do with this increased flexibility? If they turn that increased flexibility into something really good, and Anthony Simons uses these increased opportunities to really blow up and become, a big time starter in the league, then all of a sudden it's like, well, that was the right move. And, good work by them. Where today it's like, I don't know. So you have to take an approach of look at it from all sides, and then look at it from both. What does it do right now today, and then what could the long-term outlook be? And that's kind of the filters I use when I get into those. And oftentimes it's great to have mediums like this and things like places that like Spot Track that allow me to write long form on things like that, because you have a lot more thoughts than are appropriate for a 280 character tweet to put out into the world. And that's where it's because I had the same thing. I was like, wait, that's all they got? But then you process it, you think through it, you hear some thoughts from Joe Cronin, the Blazers interim GM, about why he did it, and it's all right. I can kind of see it now. Personally, I still think they should have got more, but that's a whole other story, and a whole other path. But yeah, so when you're going into it, you got to really think about it from all sides. I think we tend to, right? This Celtics show. So we tend to think about trades from the Celtics perspective of, why couldn't they go get Norman Powell? Well, did they have the contract relief to offer? Did they have the young player that Portland maybe wanted to offer? Were they interested in taking on Norman Powell? You got to think about it from all sides there. So it becomes interesting. And like the Fournier thing was, right, I'm here in Orlando, so I know the Magic quite well. It was, we're clearing the decks. We are completely, tearing this thing down and starting over. I mean, I tweeted a trade deadline day last year. Terrence Ross was the epitome of the Will Smith gif where he's standing at the end of Fresh Prince looking at the empty family room because nothing else is left, right? And all his buddies were gone. The whole locker room was cleared out, and it's like that's what it was like. But yeah, so you have to really factor all those things in, because sometimes it's about, a lot of times, what can I even get for this guy, and then it's is it worth even making a trade or not?
For sure. So what would you say to Celtics fans who are upset right now? I know you talked a little bit about it, but can you kind of elaborate on that? What would you say to the Celtics fans that are
Sure.
upset about us not making our version of that Norm Powell deal?
Yeah, I like Norman Powell quite a bit, but what I wonder when seeing what the Blazers' plan was, I don't know that they wanted the 12 million for Josh Richardson next season on their books. I think their idea was we want to get Powell's long-term money off the books and have minimal salary on our cap sheet next year, which that's ultimately what will likely happen because they're probably going to waive Eric Bledsoe, and that's only a 3.9 million cap hit for Bledsoe. So you waive him, you reduce that number way down, and off you go. And then, the other thing is, I don't know, I'm not privy, and you're not going to get a real super honest answer because, of course, Portland loves Keon Johnson, right? And they wanted to draft him all along, and all the things that'll be said. But we don't know. Is it a situation where you look at it and do they like Keon Johnson more than Aaron Nesmith or Romeo Langford or even Peyton Pritchard if he was thrown that way? That's where it starts to become, all right. And then if their goal was, we're going to move Powell and Covington in one deal as a package, the Celtics don't have a real clear path to go get that done. There wasn't a real easy way for them to say, all right, we can get there. They could have. There's ways you could have made it work, but not ways that are easy. And not in that this was kind of an easy way for Portland. In one trade, we move these two guys and go. And then if it turns into, if they trade CJ McCollum in the next week and that turns into something, now all of a sudden you see that bigger picture. And that's where it starts to be like, God, that's why Boston, they weren't interested in getting the Celtics involved. Because I don't think this is a situation where the Celtics weren't interested in getting Norman Powell. I think it's a situation where the Blazers just found a deal they liked a little bit better than whatever it was Boston could have offered.
Yeah, I think reflecting on that deal, that last part that you just mentioned about getting both of those contracts off in one deal is really what I came down to. And, it's Brad Stevens' first in-season deal involved moving off Wancho for, tax purposes, bringing back Bol and PJ Dozier. And that's the one part of me that was a little, inquisitive about that move so early on, because I felt like there's scenarios like this that could have popped up where you're throwing in a guy that's, 6-7 million. I forget exactly what he was. Yep. And, it helps you get to those places a little bit easier, but that's already happened. So we're not going to look back, but I do want to start to look at some of the assets that are currently on the roster and kind of get some assessment from you on what you think. I know you've done a couple pieces for Celtics blog around this, but as I said at the beginning, things
where I pitched trading for Norman Powell.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, things change so quickly that whether it's the trade for Norman Powell or it's how we viewed this team a month ago is different than what it's been. In the last 2 weeks where they're 11-4 in the last 15, and it's kind of altering the prism of which you look at this team and what can happen. They're 5 games out of first. Game out of getting out of the play, and then they play Brooklyn in a couple of days here right before the trade deadline. So right now let's start with the guy that I think we've pretty much been operating for about the last month plus. Like, all right, it's definitive, he's probably going to go for a second round pick, or we're gonna he's going to be off this team by the trade deadline. That's Dennis Schroeder. Let's talk about him. There's been rumors of him to Cleveland, him to Chicago, which I think is even more interesting now that the standings are getting a little bit closer and you're potentially sending him to a team that you're going to be competing with for seeding or even see in the playoffs. What's your gut feeling on what happens with Dennis? Does this last run change anything, or is still kind of the way that we've mostly collectively been feeling for the last month still the most likely outcome, that he's off this team and the Celtics move on from him?
Yeah, I still tend to think he probably goes because I think it's the easiest path to making sure you avoid the luxury tax is by trading him. The Celtics, as it stands today, they're about 2.7 million over the luxury tax, and that's factoring in all-star bonus money for Jaylen Brown. Now, if Jaylen Brown does not get named to the all-star team, that will drop to somewhere between 800 and 900,000. And that would be one simple move away from getting out of the tax. So that's Bruno Fernando, PJ Dozier, Bol, easy, said, off we go. If you think that there's a chance Brown's going to make the all-star team, which the tricky part is, the trade deadline comes before the all-star break. So if it turns into, somebody rolls an ankle, the Monday before the all-star game or all-star break, and they can't go play, Jaylen Brown could be very easily, there's ways to see him named as an all-star replacement. And it doesn't matter how he got there. He's an all-star. He gets his bonus money. So that's where the Celtics have to approach this as we're 2.7 million over, because this is their last chance to get out of the tax. Now, I don't say this because I care about saving Wyc Grousbeck and his partners a whole bunch of money. I don't care about saving billionaires money.
Keith, that's the whole reason we do this podcast, is
right?
saving billionaires money. That's essentially the whole podcast. You're missing the point.
Tell me about it. But what I do care about is Brad Stevens being able to go to Wyc Grousbeck a year. Well, not a year, but 6 months from now, when we're into to the summer moves, and saying, hey, remember when I got you out of the luxury tax and you were part of that $10 to $13 million distribution and you got that? Hey, I need to dip in now, and I need a little bit more to go get player X, because we can do a trade and take on salary and all those things. I believe Wyc Grousbeck and Celtics ownership, when they say they will pay the tax for a contender. Why do I believe that? I believe it because they've done it before. They did it in the late 2000 range and the early 2010s with the KG Pierce Ray Allen team. That team was extremely expensive, and they paid the tax without worry, and they kept adding to that team. I think that's kind of been forgotten now, right? They went out, they got Brandon Bass, they got Courtney Lee, they kept adding to that team to try to keep that window open. So I think when they believe they have a true contender, that they'll go do it. I think the reasons they didn't do it in prior years was when they were pretty good, like going to the East Finals, was I think they felt like they had enough. So it wasn't, we'd have to trade away something good to go get somebody. Now I think they're in a position where what they will ultimately do is they will pay the tax next year. It's setting up that they kind of have to. It would be really hard not to. And I think that is why it's important to not pay it this year, because then you can hopefully, and that's up to Brad and crew to hold ownership accountable to, hey, we got you out this year, get us set up next year so we can go with that. So that's why I do think Schroeder will go. That was a long answer to your very simple question. But I think Schroeder will go for that reason, because I just think it's the easiest move to make sure you do it. Now, they could dump a couple second round picks on OKC or Orlando or somebody to take on Dozier and Bull both, and that'll get them there as well. Maybe that's the path, or maybe Bruno Fernando or something that opens up a roster spot too. But I think there is a sense. Now, you mentioned it. They're playing great, right? And they're starting to finally look like the team we think. They're looking at it and saying, well, hey, Schroeder's part of this, and he is. He's one of their top 8 guys. He's been, there every game in and game out. And if they don't feel like there's a better point guard to go get to kind of play behind Marcus Smart, then maybe the answer is, we got to go the Bull, Dozier, Fernando route to shed this money and get to where we need to be, because we need Dennis Schroeder, because we can't upgrade the spot. But I still kind of floating over my head, if they can get back a passable point guard to kind of replace him in the rotation, I think there is a chance. But I'm also glad you mentioned, now all of a sudden it's, do I want to make Cleveland better? I might have a chance at running them down, where, even 2 weeks ago, that looked like a, complete pipe dream.
Yeah, for sure. And another guy that's got a big number is Al Horford. So can you explain his kind of partially guaranteed deal to the people?
Yeah, no, this is a good question. So Horford's contract this year is $27 million. Next year, it's $26.5 million. That is the number that is on the cap sheet and against the tax right now today. It's always the full salary amount that gets charged to the luxury tax. Against the cap, it's always the full salary amount as well. But it is only $14.5 million guaranteed. So what happens is, let's say the Celtics or another team, if they were to trade Horford, decide, we're just going to waive Al Horford. They waive him, and they only eat $14.5 million in dead money. If the Celtics or whatever team Horford is on are in the NBA Finals this year, that guarantee jumps up to $19.5 million. If they win the NBA Finals this coming year, that becomes fully guaranteed at the 26.5. Now, where it gets tricky, though, is if they don't move him by the trade deadline going into the offseason, so now we're talking draft or this summer, his trade value in a trade is only the guaranteed amount of his contract. as excited as I am about the run of good play recently, I don't know that they're going to the finals or winning the finals. So let's just live in real world now. We can dream a little bit later. But that means his number is only going to be 14.5 million in a trade, unless they take the step of, hey, you know what, we really need it to be 20 million. They can then say, we're going to guarantee that for 20 million. And bump it up to 20 million if that's what they need it to be in a trade. So there's a lot of flexibility with that Horford number. They could even get it all the way up to the full amount if that's what they needed to do to make a trade. And at that point, if you're an opposing team, people always think about like Bradley Beal or something like that. If you're the Wizards and you're trading Bradley Beal, you're starting over and rebuilding. Having a $26.5 million expiring contract coming off your books, not the worst thing in the world. Clearly Boston would have to plus that trade package to get there, because Horford's not going to be nearly enough. But that's the kind of options you're working with Al Horford now and moving into this offseason.
Well, so staying on that topic, let's say hypothetically the Celtics, get under the tax, but the team is relatively intact, wherever they exit. To your point, I would be very surprised if this is a conference finals or a finals team or winning the finals. So let's take that out of it for now. Let's say they get to to the summer and it's, around the draft or free agency, and they want to move on from Al Horford and kind of spread out, only give him the guaranteed amount. Maybe they can spread it out a little bit over some years. Does that open up any flexibility within cap room for the Celtics to be able to use in the offseason? I feel like the answer is no, but I'm curious to know. Maybe you can explain it better, because I don't really know the full answer to that.
Yeah, and I think what happened was, when they made the Kemba Walker for Horford swap, before they did anything else last summer, it started a lineup of, hey, they might be in a position to go get cap space now, because you waive Horford, you're only sitting on that 14.5. You could even stretch that money and it'd be 4 point something million dollars as well. The challenge is, what I think got missed then they extended Marcus Smart, they extended Robert Williams. Both look like the right decisions now. Then they also extended Josh Richardson, and that ate up any cap flexibility they have. So barring massive roster changes between now and the very start of the summer, they're not going to have cap space, because you've got Tatum at a max, Brown at even if he misses the All-Star money, a near max number. You've got Smart, you've got Williams, you've got Richardson, and then you've got all the draft picks that they've had over the years. They're all sitting, between 2 and 5 million each as well. So them having cap space, highly unlikely to be. And I think what they have done instead is, to go back to why it's important to get out of the tax this year, is they've set themselves up to know, hey, if we want to be a good competitive team next season, which they obviously do, we will probably need to be a tax team. And that's why they've kind of set up with some of these extensions, because then it turns these guys into tradable assets versus now it's going to be a sign and trade, and we got to get into all these complications that just make things a lot harder. Now it's just a lot easier to build and set up straight trades.
So with that, and sorry, Greg, just one follow-up on Al. We had Jared Weiss on here a couple of weeks ago, right before he broke the story that, the Celtics were kind of shopping Al Horford around. What do you see as Al's value on the market? Because, all the way back to this, potential Blazers, as you said, there's a couple avenues where you could get there. Al Horford's the main avenue that you would take as far as a direct highway to try and get to the number that you would need. So what's your gut intake on Al's value, and if you see anything across the landscape that maybe makes some sense?
Yeah, Al Horford at this point is clearly overpaid, but he's not a bad player. It's not like you're talking about a guy who's absolutely horrible and has a super negative value on his contract or anything like that. So if there was a contender prior to the Celtics, good run here over the last month, if there was a contender that was like, we're really one big away from really kind of pushing all in on this thing, you could have seen them saying, yeah, let's grab Horford. And again, same as it is with the Celtics or anybody else, if it doesn't work out, we just waive him for half his salary next year and we move on. The other thing is, though, it is a big number, and it's a big number for an aging player, and that makes it a little bit more difficult. What kind of saves this is, I like to call it a pseudo expiring, just because of the control a team has next year because of that 14.5 million guarantee. It's not a full expiring, but it's pseudo expiring. So you can do that. So I think his value is good. Alone, Al Horford is not getting you a whole heck of You're not like getting a first round pick or great young players or anything like that. But as part of the salary match, if you add a pick to it or you add a couple of the kids, if somebody's really in love with one of the young guys for some reason, then you're in a position where, all right, now we're in a spot where we can really kind of make something happen using Horford as the salary matching, because it's not complete dead money. This is not one of those guys who can't play at all and is just sitting there. It's truly just a contract line item at this point.
Well, with that, let's transition into talking about the Celtics' other big man, young Robert Williams. And by the way, Keith, we're the guys behind the Lob Williams hoodie. So on
nice.
On this pod, we refer to him as Lob Williams. We are not a Time Lord pod, just for your reference moving forward. So I was reading your article on Celtics blog where you I think it was the trade deadline primer that you wrote about a month ago. And you talked about Robert Williams having the poison pill contract. Can you kind of talk about what you see Rob's value around the league as, and also what that poison pill means? Yeah.
So I'll talk about the poison pill first I'm gonna nerd out on you here for a second, just because I can, and that's what I do.
Wait, what have you been doing so far?
Right? No, well, now we're gonna get real nerdy here. So what happens in a situation when a player has signed an extension like Robert Williams has, their trade number is different on both sides. So it's one number for the Celtics as outgoing money, and it's another number for the other team as incoming money. And why they do that is it's essentially it's not to close a loophole, but it's to protect players from signing an extension and their teams immediately turning around and trading them and saying like, hey, now look, you can get this guy, he'll be signed for $30 million next year, but you can get him for 10 this year. So what happens in this specific instance, it's not the weird thing is the CBA term poison pill doesn't even exist in the CBA. It's not even a real thing. It's become a made up media thing that we all use. But in this instance of the poison pill, what that means is for Robert Williams, for the Celtics to trade him, he counts at $3.66 million. Is essentially what it is. So let's call it 3.7 million on their side. For the other team coming in, it's that salary plus the average salary of the years of his extension. So what that means is he signed his extension. So that's a total this year, and the 4-year extension is 51.6 million. So what that turns into is an average of 10.3 million. So what that does is that one's not such a huge difference. It's not like when you're coming off the rookie scale and a guy signs a max and he had been making, 7 million the prior year. That becomes a huge difference. But what this does is that imbalance can make it very hard to trade a player because the other team has to be able to take in 10.3 million, and the Celtics are only sending out 3.6. Now, what helps the Celtics is they have this abundance of trade exceptions that they can use, to absorb unbalanced salary and trades and things. But that's what it is. It's the poison pill is that imbalance. His value, I think his value now is the point where the Celtics would need a whole bunch of stuff to even consider trading Robert Williams. There's career years, and then there's these jumps from, I don't want to say out of nowhere, because you could see glimmers of this in the past, but he's gone from flashes to nightly great contributor. They've built the entire defense around him now and everything he does. I just wrote about it this morning. The Pistons game was one of the best examples of this yet. What they're doing is Horford is now defending the opposing center, and Rob is just defending whoever the worst shooter is on the floor. And that's allowing him to he's just roaming and running around and doing all sorts of stuff. He was guarding Hamidou Diallo last night, and there was times where he wasn't within 15 feet of Hamidou Diallo.
That poor guy can't save his life, man. No, oh, my, I felt so bad for him.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? So what Ime Udoka does is, all right, Rob, you're guarding him, but really what you're going to do is you're going to float around and help on everybody. You're going to be the doubler. You're going to be the rim protector. You're going to jump in their weak side. You're going to do all sorts of stuff. And that's part of why the defense has gone from pretty good earlier to now it's this playing at an elite level. They're fourth in the league, but since the calendar year flipped over, they've been first or second. It kind of keeps going back and forth between them, the Warriors, and occasionally the Suns jump in there as well. But they have been outstanding defensively. So what ultimately is when you have this guy as this big of a key, that's huge. Now, I would not say he is untouchable in a trade. I think that term gets thrown around way too often. There are probably 5 truly untouchable players in the league total. And yet every team thinks that they have 5 on every team. Like that guy's untouchable in a trade. But I mean, if the Bucks come to you and said, hey, we got to move Giannis for some reason, but we got to have Robert Williams back. Thank you, Rob, for everything you've done. Enjoy your time in Milwaukee, right? Like we get too crazy with this untouchable stuff. But where it is real is it would take a whole lot to get him. And because you have that imbalance, the salary is small, unless he's part of a much, much bigger trade to get a true third star in. I believe that third star would have to be a true big at this point, just the way the roster is built. I can't see him going anywhere. It would be really shocking, to see him moved out in a trade.
Okay, I'm going to give you 2 avenues here. Avenue 1 is Robert Williams gets moved in a deal for Sabonis, which is something that some people have thrown out there. I'm anti that deal. And Avenue 2 is the Celtics make a move more on the margins, and we go out and we just like pick apart Portland, and we say, hey, give us Yusuf Nurkic. Like, what do we need to make that happen? Which avenue are you choosing?
In the Sabonis deal, I'm assuming Horford stays and
Yes.
or an equivalent level player. Yeah, I wouldn't do it either, just because I think you're sacrificing too much of what makes you special as a defensive team to upgrade your offense by a decent amount. It's getting a little crazy. I see people in my mentions like, why are they even in on Sabonis? He's not even good. Like, come on, let's not be dumb. Like, he's really good. His stuff that he does is like, I don't even want to say it's a poor man's Nikola Jokic. It's like upper middle class Nikola Jokic. Like his go look at his offensive numbers; they are outstanding. But I think the New York Knicks are a great cautionary tale here. What made them so special last year was their defense. They were just so good defensively, and they looked at it and said, "All right, we got to upgrade the offense to really become a good team." But they did it at the expense of how good they were defensively by adding Fournier and Kemba Walker, who I think Celtics fans could have told you, maybe not the best move if you're trying to fix things and still be a good defense. But it's now they're playing very poorly and they've slipped and they may not even be in the play-in tournament. And that's what I would worry about in the Celtics in a path like that. Because Nurkic is going to come at a far smaller cost to acquire than Sabonis. If you felt like that was the path to go, like, hey, we think we could get him for reasonable, salary matching and not really maybe give up another key rotation player, yeah, go do it. I mean, I have no issue with that. That's, it's hard to say, go do it now using the trade exception and just dip into the tax, because that starts to get a little crazy because you also have to re-sign Nurkic this offseason. And that's one of those deals where it might look good in year 1, year 2 might look kind of okay. And then years 3 and 4 might look really, really bad. So you have to be very cautious, but yeah, I would not be jumping at the opportunity to send Williams out for Sabonis unless I had something else lined up to bring in somebody who covers for what Sabonis doesn't do on the defensive end. And that's where that gets overly complicated and tricky to figure out.
Yeah, that's always been part of the debate that we've had. And, I was the one who was, at one point kind of thinking about that Rob for Sabonis, and that it's, maybe not immediately, but in the offseason, you could go try to find a JaVale McGee, Nerlens Noel, someone who's not going to do it as well as Rob Williams, clearly, but gives you a little bit more balance on each side. But I think at this point, it feels very unlikely that Robert Williams or the other guy with a poison pill, Marcus Smart, both the way that they're playing and how important they are to this team right now in this turnaround, feels highly unlikely that either of them are going to be moved next week. What I am curious to know is, we talked about, you wrote a trade article in which Norm Powell's already off the table. And we just talked about, Yusuf Nurkic right now. That could be another guy. Who are some other realistic targets if we're going to operate under, we think most likely the big 4, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Rob Williams, Marcus Smart, they're not moving. It's really everything else plus picks is kind of what you have to work with in the TPEs. Who are some realistic targets that you're kind of keeping your eye on between now and the deadline on Thursday?
Yeah, in that same article, I pitched Harrison Barnes, and that's like
my
year
guy.
5. Like, I love Harrison Barnes, and
it's
it's I've seen after I wrote that up, I a lot of the feedback was like, is Harrison Barnes even that good? And it's like, oh, I get, you're not going to just start staying up till 1 a.m. on the East Coast watching Kings games. I get it, but just go look at the numbers. Like, the numbers tell you how good this guy is. The other thing I like about Harrison Barnes, one of my favorite quotes I've ever heard, this was from my GM in the league, and he said, if you need Harrison Barnes to be your second or third best player, he can be. If you need him to be your fourth or fifth best player, he can be. There's no ego. He just wants to win. He just wants to play. He just wants to be involved. And you think about it, right? He grew up as the Warriors' third, fourth, fifth guy. That's where he grew up as. Then he went to Dallas. They bumped him up into a more primary role, and he was still very good. In Sacramento, he started out a little more primary, then it's like taking a little turn as De'Aaron Fox has elevated and a couple other guys, but he's still playing very good, despite the fact that the Kings are a mess. A lot of times guys get these inflated stats on bad teams. That's not Barnes. His efficiency is still really good. He's shooting the heck out of the ball. He can play a lot of different ways for you and open up a lot of stuff. Now, the challenge is it's going to cost you Al Horford. There's almost no other way to get to it that's reasonable without trading Al Horford. And that, I get it, because the way the Celtics are playing right now, that could be something that leaves you feeling a little queasy. Because then what you're trading, if you move Al Horford, is you're starting 4 or 5, depending on what the heck we want to call Rob now in this new floater role, but also your backup 5. That's really what Al is. It's kind of like, remember when Derek Favors used to start next to Rudy Gobert, and then he would go out, and then he'd slide over and play the 5 when Gobert needed to come out. And that was kind of the key to their rotation. That's what Boston has done with Ime Udoka. They're playing a 3-big rotation with Rob, Allen, Grant. And that's, how it's working. So I tend to think, as I run through this now, that one's a little harder to sort, but that's the guy I would love to go get. It's very, very hard. As you kind of look around, the challenge is there's just not a ton of sellers right now around the league. There's not a lot of bad teams. I don't like Jeremy Grant for this team. I think he wants a bigger role than what the Celtics would want to give him. So I'm not super sold on that one. If you could do something where Josh Richardson had to go to get you a different big who could fit in, if you could pull that off and maybe get Josh Hart from New Orleans, that I don't hate. I kind of like Josh Hart quite a bit here. But the big problem is, people start throwing out, and I'm sure you guys get it too, but like, go get Christian Wood and Eric Gordon. All right, that's $30 million in salary. Like, maybe they'll take on Horford, but then who else goes? They're going to want Schroeder. How many picks are you going to have to set in that scenario? And it starts to get messy. And that's where Langford, Nesmith, Pritchard, not holding much as far as trade value goes kind of hurts, because you're going to have to plus up these offers with draft picks if you're going to go get one of these guys. You're just going to have to. And now, unfortunately, I think people are going to have this warped perception because Powell and Covington didn't return that much, that anybody who gives up a first round pick, blew it, because, you should have just got Norman Powell. And that's, that seems to be a little bit unfair.
Yeah, especially when you think about Keon. Was it Keon Johnson or Keon Jackson?
Keon Johnson.
Yeah, Keon Johnson. We spoke with Derek Murray of I forget what basketball draft.
Basketball News works with Matt Babcock and that crew.
Yep.
Yeah. So we spoke with him before the season, and Johnson was somebody that he was saying the Celtics might be targeting with that pick that we ended up trading in the Horford deal. So like, although it was a second round pick, it is a rookie who like hasn't really got a huge opportunity and definitely had a lot of value before the draft, right? So like, yeah, I'm not really even sure what to make of that. But when you talk about different guys around the league, like Barnes, to me, I just don't understand why anybody would be against getting Harrison Barnes. I really don't get it. And like we've heard, Will and I were huge on this with the TP last year. Like Harrison Barnes was a guy that we wanted. We want Harrison Barnes. And so many people, to your point, were just like, Harrison Barnes sucks. It's like, okay, like, what are you talking about? We just like didn't understand it. But are there any other guys around the league that you think like the typical Celtics fan might be undervaluing in terms of who might come back that's available at the trade deadline?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when I think about it as well, what do the Celtics need, right? I think if you're going to move on from Schroeder, you need a point guard. obviously, right? Because I like Peyton Pritchard, but he's just not ready to handle that role behind Marcus Smart. I mean, last night's game, for me, solidified. That was a disaster.
That game got out of control very quickly.
Yeah, 4 minutes. Ime Udoka emptying the bench with 4 minutes and having to use a timeout and put Grant Williams and Josh Richardson back in, which is probably only because they weren't completely, stiffened up from sitting so long at that point. That's a problem, right?
Yeah.
That's bad. So point guard still probably a need. I know some people think, Smart's not the guy long term, and if you could go get a great point guard, but who? That's probably not. I know some people are now dreaming about Damian Lillard and stuff, but that's that's not a real thing to get into now. So I think about it's tough because I think a lot of these guys have been mentioned at points for the Celtics. So Terrence Ross, right, has been thrown out there a million times. And Ross is a guy who kind of is a designated shooter, can come in, play for you. And if things aren't going well, you just don't play him. And then, on the nights where he is going well, he can shoot you into a win. He's that good. The Pacers, a guy I would maybe think about going and grabbing is Torrey Craig, if you could pull it off, if you could do that, because that's a good defensive player, and there's always room for another good defensive player on the team, and the cost shouldn't be all that high to go get a guy like him. From them. On the Pistons, I know people will probably be like, wait, what? I don't hate the idea of Kelly Olynyk if that came down to it, right? We've talked about Nurkic, but I kind of like Kelly Olynyk too. I think his floor spacing, he's always been a better defender than people ever gave him credit for. And I know Brad Stevens isn't the coach anymore, but Brad got a good amount out of Kelly Olynyk, when they had him. It was a short time because then he was part of had to go to clear the decks for Gordon Hayward that summer. But that's a guy I don't hate the idea of. I mean, Jayshawn Tate, if you could steal him from the Rockets, super low salary, but dude who defends at a very high level, crazy energy guy, fans would love him. He'd be kind of like the souped up version of Javonte Green in a way for this team, where you just throw him in and be like, okay, cause havoc for the next 5 minutes and do your thing, running around doing that. I kind of sometimes think about DJ Augustin from the Rockets if you move Schroeder. If not, then it doesn't make sense. You don't need to add him. But if you move Schroeder, go get it. Very minimal guarantee next year. You get move on from him for basically nothing if it doesn't work out. So those are kind of the guys. I know nobody's like, super fired up and overly excited, but I'm trying to be a little bit more realistic because I just don't know that the big blockbuster trade is there in the next week. In the summertime, maybe. And that's why I think it's probably more likely than not Al Horford doesn't go anywhere. It's been a key part of this. This starting group is one of the best lineups in the entire league. And Ime's leaning on him pretty heavily, game by game. Hopefully that doesn't break, right? That's always your worry, especially with guys like Al and Rob. And Marcus at this point, is that they might get hurt. Even Jaylen Brown to some level, he's had some health issues, but as long as they can stay healthy, you feel pretty good about that starting group. And I don't know that it'd be running to break that up unless it's a clear, huge upgrade.
Yeah, Kelly Olynyk's an interesting name. I wouldn't be opposed to a reunion with Kelly Olynyk. We had some good times. Yeah. Game 7 against Washington, that will always live fondly in my heart. So I wouldn't mind bringing Kelly O back. But real quick, let's transition just to some of the major league-wide speculation going on. And of course, the biggest one is Harden Simmons. Is that going to get done? Teams are calling collusion. Who knows what? I think the hardest part about it is at this point, Philly has to add in something to Simmons. You can't just take Simmons. Like, it's just such a wild card. And then it becomes, is Maxey too much? Is Thibault enough? Is a pick enough? What is it that gets it done? This is probably the one that everyone's going to have eyes on. I think there's some other big names that, you'll hear, whether it's Brad Beal, maybe not until the offseason, most likely. We've talked about Sabonis, touched on CJ McCollum, but let's stick with Harden Simmons. Do you think anything gets done, or this is also going to kick itself down the road into the offseason?
Yeah, just the cap nerd in me has to say too, you have to add in something just to make the salaries work there too. That's the other thing that I think is being left out a little bit. Now that's easy enough. You throw in Danny Green if you needed to, or whatever to make that work. But man, I haven't changed my mind more on something than this. in my entire life. I don't think. I think I waffled less about leaving Disney to cover the NBA than I have on if I think Ben Simmons will get traded.
I'm just imagining you like trying to fall asleep at night, just like, do I like James Harden? Do I like Ben Simmons? Which ones? Like, I just imagine you wrestling with this decision in your daily life.
You're not far off, Will. You're not far off, man. That probably says a lot about me. What I go to thinking about. If you had asked me a month ago, I would have said, "Yep, Simmons is getting dealt." I believed that since the offseason. I just, whether it's, wasting a year of Embiid if you feel that way or whatever your case is, like you got to move him. This is not going to continue to run out. About 2 weeks ago, I was like, man, they've held it this. Might as well now. If their plan is we're going star hunting and star trades are hard to pull off at the deadline just because of the big salaries involved, we're going to hold. We'll make that happen when we get to the into the summer. Now, all of a sudden that this Harden stuff is out there and the Nets seemingly are open on listening. Now I'm back to, well, maybe this does happen in the next few days. And if I had to guess, I am a firm believer when there's this much smoke around something, there's usually at least a small fire. And this is so much smoke that I'm starting to think this might be a pretty big fire. And I'm thinking this might be it, right? We may be seeing, a Simmons for Harden swap. Does Brooklyn end up with Simmons? I don't know. Maybe they turn it into a 3-team deal and Brooklyn's not all that interested. He goes somewhere else and they fill out a whole bunch of depth because, man, do they need it. That team is a mess right now. I mean, they're just, they're falling apart, and all there. It's funny because people are looking at it. Kyrie can only play half the games. KD is hurt. Harden's hurt, not playing. And then, but I look at it as other than Patty Mills, they're veteran additions over the last 2 seasons just have not worked. Blake Griffin was fine last year, but this year now looks done. Paul Millsap's giving them nothing. LaMarcus Aldridge can't play defense anymore because he can't really move. Some of their kids are interesting, but they're not quite ready, despite the fact that, like Kessler Edwards is a 2-way player that starts for them. Like it's wild. So that says to me, maybe they don't just take Simmons. Maybe they expand that into a 3-way trade where Simmons is the conduit for Harden to go out and they add a whole bunch of depth through moving him. And that may be, then they look at it and say, all right, we got KD, we got Kyrie half the time, we've got all this depth, we've got enough to make this work. But man, what a fall, right? Because this is, before the start of the season, I went round and round on Twitter with Nets fans of, claiming that they won the trade, the KG trade, because now they had KD and Kyrie and Harden and are going to, roll to the title and all those things. I'm like, well, those two things are not the same, right? Like that's not, you didn't win the trade. Like you still didn't get Tatum and Brown and all this other stuff. And you wandered the wilderness for a few years. They're trying to figure it out, but they built it up and did great. But now all of a sudden, this is why I say all the time, windows are short in the NBA. People look at it, they look at stuff on paper, they say, man, that's it. The Nets are going to run the East for the next 4 years. Season, maybe half a year. They kind of sort of ran the East, maybe. We can't go in and make these wild proclamations and assumptions like this because it rarely does it work out that way.
For sure. And Keith, before we get you out of here, man, because we're about 50 minutes in, one thing that we always do with our guests is we put our guests through something called the fast break. And Will, do you want to? I feel like you do a really good job explaining what the fast break is.
Yeah, I'm happy to break it down here. So pretty much what we're going to do here, Keith, we're going to put 60 seconds on our fancy timer, which is just the iPhone that I have in my hand. And what we're going to do is Greg and I are going to go back and forth asking you quick hitting questions. Yes, no, choose this or that, fact or fiction. And then we're just going to trap you into some takes that you didn't really want to stick with, but it's the internet and we're going to chop it up, put it into little segments, and that's going to be your take for the rest of eternity. Does that sound cool with you?
Yeah, that's good. I don't know. Is it 60 real seconds or 60 Keith Smith seconds? Because I clearly talk a lot.
Yeah, that's the thing. So with this, like we just had Josiah Johnson on, and I think most of his answers were a little long-winded. So try and keep your answers to like 1 or 2 words.
Perfect. Let's go.
All right. Let's get this going. Greg, I'm going to start this one. Usually I let you start. I'm going to go ahead and start this one. So we're going to kick it off in 3, 2, go. Favorite NBA Twitter follow?
Woj.
Best dog movie or performance by a dog in a movie?
8 Below.
Best Disney Plus Marvel TV show so far.
Geez, you're making me pick between like kids here. I really liked Falcon and Winter Soldier a lot.
Who says no in this trade? Jaylen Brown for Ben Simmons and Tyrese Maxey.
Boston.
Choose one. More fun. NBA trade deadline or opening a free agency?
Opening a free agency.
Piece of advice for a younger Keith Smith.
Chase the dream early. Don't wait so long.
Fact or fiction? The Celtics will avoid the play-in with the top 6 seed.
Fact.
Your go-to NBA podcast.
NBA front office show. I really enjoyed Dunked On a lot because it's Cap stuff.
Final question. Super Bowl prediction. Rams or Bengals? Who you got?
Heart says Bengals, head says Rams.
Okay, that's cool. I appreciate that. I'm on the Joe Burrow train right now. I'm pulling for the Bengals here. Joe Burrow's has got this swagger to him that I can't help but root for, but I'm with you. I feel like if I absolutely had to make a pick, it's probably Rams.
My wife is from Cincinnati, so we will be rooting for the Bengals. My best friend is a Rams fan, so I'm a little conflicted. The Pats aren't in it, so I don't really care. So either way, two very important people in my life are happy.
I forgot to mention this at the top. Happy 5-year anniversary to all of us Pats fans on this podcast today. It's a 5-year anniversary of Comeback from 28-3 as we're recording this. So that's a big day. And Keith, I was in the building for that one. It was out. So Greg and I, much like you live in Florida, Celtics fan. We live in Austin, Texas. And, we're Celtics fans, grew up in Dorchester. So I got to make the drive from Austin to Houston, last minute whim. And I was in the building for 28-3. Best sports memory I've ever had in my entire life. So
worked out better for you than my doing that when I was living in Southern California during the undefeated season. We went to the Super Bowl, my wife and I, and it was I'll never forget leaving that place. It was like collectively Patriots fans streaming out of there, so disappointed and stunned. And then there was like this invisible barrier that then like just this stream of like curses and what happened and everything else. And I remember calling, my dad. I talked to my parents are still home in Massachusetts and where I grew up. And I talked to my dad after every Pats game and we, talked about it and everything. And he said, all right, do you need me to get you a hotel? Because I know you're driving back to California. I said, no, weird. I got to get it as far away from this place as I can. We're driving straight through home. We stopped for gas and then that was it. And then straight home to California at the time.
Every time I watch that, like, I don't know why I do this to myself, but I watch highlights from that season and that game. The Brady to Moss pass that was like 70 yards and literally hit him in the freaking hands, man. Like in the stadium, did y'all realize how close that was to being a catch?
That was on the sideline right in front of us. And they remember back before the Giants scored, Brady threw a touchdown to Moss. And that was kind of like that. We were at that end of the field. And I was like, holy crap, we just saw them like, that's the game-winning score. And then Asante Samuel dropped that interception. Oh, God. Right on the side. Yeah, I mean, we're handing on a really crappy.
Why are we doing
Why are we doing this? Like, this team's won 6 Super Bowls. Let's go back to. They came back against the Falcons.
They came back from 28-3, 34-28. Brady got.
Funny story about that because I'll take us out on a high note about
let's
that
do it.
Day. One of my other best friends from Massachusetts too, we watch all the Patriots playoff games together, and my wife, and we're all screaming and yelling during the comeback and like, oh my God, this is happening. We woke my daughter up. She was at the time she was sick. We made her go to bed at around halftime, and I was like, you're not going to miss anything. Like, go to bed. And she came out. And she's like, why are you guys yelling? What's happening? And then we let her stay up. And when James White, scores on that little, kind of, off tackle run to win, hey, it's one of the coolest moments because she was so fired up and, screaming and yelling and jumping on the furniture, and we're going crazy. Our neighbors are like, oh my God, I cannot believe that actually happened. Like, it was one of my favorite moments ever. And then then James White was here at Disney World, so we went to see him. We let her skip school to see him, and then 2 years later, we let her skip school again to go see Brady and Edelman.
That's a great dad move.
That's
a Hall of Fame dad move.
You're
right
not
there.
gonna. I mean, so I know I'm talking to teacher here, but it's you're not gonna miss
cool
anything
teacher.
from one day of class. That's an all time memory.
That is
going to the Super Bowl parades.
Yeah, that is a fact. You will not miss anything, pretty much from your entire high school experience.
Yeah. When the Pats beat the Rams for the first one, you couldn't have paid me. You would have been an ungodly sum of money to go to class on the Super Bowl parade in Boston. There was no way I was missing.
I may have seen you out there. I was out there too.
It was freezing. It was so cold.
Yeah.
It's that run is still probably my favorite, just because it was so unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
Right, in the snow game, I remember right where I grew up is only a couple towns over from Foxborough. I grew up in Bridgewater, and
nice.
Sprinting out of the house when Vinatieri made the game-winning kick, and diving into the snow in our yard, and acting like morons. And
you do the Lonnie Paxton Snow Angels?
We might have. I don't even remember. I just remember my dad standing. He wasn't jumping in the snow, but standing on the porch, like laughing at me and my friends, like what a bunch of morons, and just how much fun that whole thing was. But yeah, see, there it is. We reversed it.
There it is. We made it all work. And Keith, we're gonna have you back on at some point here. We'll do the whole nostalgia train. We'll go through all the championships at some point.
Love it.
But before we let you out of here, man, give us a quick rundown. I tried to give a rundown of where we can find you, but you're in so many places. You're gonna do it better than I can. So let the people know where they can find your material.
Sure. The easiest place to find me is at Keith Smith NBA on Twitter. Be forewarned, I tweet a lot. Somebody showed me that they had tweet notifications on, and that's absurd. Don't do that. I'm not breaking news. You don't need those on. I tweet too much for that. I can only imagine how often your phone goes off. But you can find me there. You can find my written work covering the Celtics at Celtics blog as part of SB Nation. Any salary cap work, roster stuff over at Spot Track. I appreciate it. Well, you nailed the pronunciation right off the bat, man. That was money, because very few people do. And then it was and then if you're looking for shows where I nerded out like a cap geek here, if you're looking for that, but a full show of that, check out NBA Front Office Show with Trevor Lane and I. We go Monday through Friday, sometimes twice a day if needed. Shows published to YouTube, or you can find NBA Front Office Show anywhere you listen to podcasts.
All right, Greg, give us our final word and let us know what the people are going to hear on the way out here.
Just harkening back to what I said at the beginning, man, it's been really cool kind of seeing your rise over the last couple of years. I'm glad you stuck with it. You're a great follow on NBA Twitter. We really appreciate you coming on, man. And shout out to our guy, our podcasting cousin, Adam Taylor, for hooking us up with Keith, and just for putting in the good word, and for you, man. Like he loves you, man. He swears by you. And,
Adam's the best.
We love Adam.
Yeah,
we do.
Absolute grinder. Nobody works harder. I love that guy. I want nothing but the best for Adam.
Same. And we're going to play you out here today with a song from my band down here in Austin, Texas. We are called Black Sheep Optimists, and this one is called The Path. Peace.